Welcome to the Eskrima podcast. My name is Jason Inayan, and I am an Inayan Eskrimador. Today we're going to talk about lots of different things. I'm trying for the first time to do the free podcast and the members only podcast on the same track, and I'll cut it up and do all those things. But before we get into the subject of the matters and all that stuff, please make sure that you like, subscribe, and comment. There's a bunch of links in the description for like our newsletter. A lot of the people that are on our newsletter that also follow the podcast have commented on how they like the mini lessons. There's a free lesson almost every day, and it's something that you should definitely take advantage of. We'd love to get you a part of that. But and for those of you that are already on, thank you guys so much for your support. I hope that you're enjoying everything. For the members, there's the ITO or ISC tribe communities. There's a phone app for that, so that way you guys can comment there, ask questions. It sometimes will become the subject of what I might be talking about in the podcast, but also what we do in our Q&A for our members. And then, of course, sometimes it becomes part of our master classes and things like that, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. So I wanted to start off the actual subject of today's podcast about sometimes the success that you have is just showing up. February has been an interesting month already for us here in 2024. Patrick and I work out together. I don't know. Of course, we have the 2 Eskrima classes during the week, the 1 Duma class on Monday nights. And then we have the Eskrima and the Duma class on Saturday. But then he and I do private lessons and work out Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then, of course, I'm doing grappling on Friday, and we have filming, recording for new content and everything that we usually do on Sunday. And in between all that and my 40-hour plus a week job, I try to squeeze in some time to edit and things like that, right? But that pretty rigorous for us anyways, training and filming and editing schedule is heavily impacted by anything that happens in the office. And whereas Patrick works for one of the biggest e-commerce companies in the world, and I work for the biggest fintech, or at least one of the biggest fintechs in the world, it's been very, very challenging this February because corporate world is establishing their targets for the rest of the year. That they've come out with their earnings reports and whatnot, and so it's been interesting to try to navigate that. And so we were training Tuesday night, and today's Thursday, but Tuesday night, and we're like, okay, we gotta do all these things, and I'm like, nah, man, it's just a challenge to be here today. It's a challenge to any person would reasonably be like, I'm just gonna stay home today. I'm not gonna do this. But as a martial artist, whether you're an instructor or a student, there's a level of dedication there that takes you beyond what the public's looking for, that black belt level, but like beyond that level of average excellence, if you will, right? Where you really have to commit to yourself. And the wonderful thing about sometimes having days where the success is just showing up and participating is that we never regret going. We never regret going, right? And that's an amazing thing for us, right? Like, you do martial arts maybe because it's a hobby, or maybe because it's a family thing, or maybe because it's self-defense, maybe you're a victim of a violence or something like that, but you do it. Or maybe it's college transcripts. You see that with youth. They're trying to get that black belt to put on their college transcripts, right? They can help set themselves apart from all the other applicants. It's a very common thing as well, right? But for those of us who dedicate ourselves to it, it takes a little bit more to get further. And I don't know if that's because of the Pareto's principle, or you've done your 20% effort, you've got your 80% of your results. Now the real hard work begins. But when you enter the dark side of that Pareto's principle, if you will, where you're going to have to engage in 80% effort to get 20% more result, right? That's just showing up sometimes. And even still, like, regardless if you're in that stage or not, it's difficult for some people. And we talk about this sometimes with my instructors about, like, hey, you got to realize, for students, especially new students, the first challenge is coming to the first class. There's all kinds of different emotional things there that people can encounter in terms of the fear of the unknown, imposter syndrome, self-incriminations about why you shouldn't or couldn't or can't. So there's all of these different things, and then there's these fears of themselves, fears of looking bad or having to come to terms with the idea that you don't know anything, and so maybe you shouldn't go because you're gonna look stupid and all these other things. So sometimes the challenge is just showing up, and that's a testament to your own will when you do that, right? When any other person would have sat on the recliner, drank a beer, and watched football, but you made it to class, right? And you participated. And the wonderful thing there, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but is how you become present, right? And that presence, it's almost as if you dispel the rest of your day, right? You're in this funk as you leave work or an argument or something happened, and you're carrying that with you, right? And you get in class and you throw a few punches, you do a couple of kicks, someone tries to do some stuff to you, you do a few techniques, maybe you're in Japanese jiu-jitsu and you do a few nage techniques and you hit the ground or you throw someone to the ground, whatever it is. And through that process, you become more present. You're inside your body more, and the outside world and its troubles seem to fade away for just that brief moment, an hour and a half class probably, right? And you attain a certain sense of peace, right? That's a gift all by itself, right? So sometimes the challenge is just showing up. I personally have been training since I was 4, and it started off as play with my dad, and then it became like, no, I'm coming to classes when I was 6, right? And then, as I got into adolescence, sometimes I didn't go because I was, an adolescent boy or a teenage angst-filled boy, right? Where, I'm just mad at the world or whatever. Those days that I didn't go, I didn't feel any better, right? As I became an adult and I got busy with things and I developed a career beyond martial arts for a short period of time, I didn't feel any better. By the time I became a bounty hunter and I was doing security work and things like that, I knew better. I knew that even if my day was terrible, I was still going to come to class because I knew I would feel better after. It was a way to ground myself, if you will, to center myself. Not because I was at martial arts, but because I was inside my body. Martial arts gave me the ability to do something, but at the same time, it wasn't something that I was doing in seclusion. I had to connect with other people in positive ways, which was really good. With doing law enforcement of any kind, you end up spending a lot of times with people that you wouldn't for various reasons, right? And then you start to see other people and everyone else in very much the same light because you're used to seeing the worst in people. And going to martial arts was a positive thing for me during that period of my life because I could connect with people on a positive level, even though we were dealing with conflict and aggression. We're dealing with it in a positive way, and I could then center myself and see the good in my fellow man, right? So show up to class, right? Show up to your training, show up for yourself. The other side of it too is any class where I have a student or a peer that doesn't show up is less. Especially everyone especially if you consider everyone brings something really unique. And I say this all the time to all of my students over the many years that I've been teaching. You bring something to class that no one else could bring. Please bring it to class every day, because we need that, right? It's obvious when, like, if you're in a room of right-handed people and there's one left-handed guy and he doesn't show up, it's obvious you're missing an experience dealing with that left-handed attacker, dealing with that person defending in a left-handed way and seeing it. There's what we teach in what I call the Inayan cipher, which is the Inayan cipher is started with my dad, right? And it's all of his teaching concepts and things like that, and how we utilize those. A lot of schools in martial arts, the instructors interchangeably use terminology and things like that. And while this is an art, it is also science, right? Just like, I did painting in college as one of the subjects that I learned. And in the beginning, when you're learning painting or drawing, it's very much like a science. There's this kind of, like if you're doing shading and you're doing drawing, there's crosshatch, and there's just different ways of using your pencil or pen to create dimension, right? And you have to do all these little exercises with rendering three-dimensional shapes while working on a two-dimensional surface, right? And you use shading, and there's specific techniques for that, right? Same thing with painting. There's specific techniques for shading in painting. There's specific techniques that you're going to use to mix your paints, right? There's a specific way that you choose your medium, like the canvas or paper that you are going to render your art on, etc. It's a science. There's a specific way to do things as a process. And as an artist, you begin to use certain things certain ways and preferences, and you're creative, and maybe you break a few rules here and there and you do things. Martial arts is no different, right? And so you have to be specific with your terminology, right? You have to be specific. You have to understand what is the irreducible of martial arts, and then what are the many variations and different subtleties, and also all the little histories and things that influence what you're doing and what you've done and what has been done and what could be done next, right? In terms of the training, who's learning, who can be taught, etc. But anyways, the Inayan cipher is our very specific way that started with my father of explaining and understanding conflict, human behavior in duress, and then understanding the geometry and physics in play as a layman when we're fighting, so that we can make split-second decisions either naturally and almost mindlessly or thoughtlessly, which is not the same as really what is without thought, right? And then also be able to create a mental space where we can think and fight at the same time. That's what the cipher is used for. It's used to teach, it's used to learn, but it's used also in the fray as well. But one of the things that I'm trying to bring up with that is that there's these three perceptual positions: the first, second, and third. Now, seems obvious, right? If we understand that of the 5 paths of learning, one of them is observation. The 3 perceptual positions are really, really important, right? It's first, second, and third position, right? So seeing it as though you're doing it, seeing it as though it's done to you, and seeing it as though it's done to someone else by someone else, right? So this is an important way for us to learn, because we're looking at what the motor mirror neuron system is utilizing in observation to learn, which is a whole different part of your nervous system that allows you to learn through mimicry and through observation, right? And coming in and doing training and having someone who's left-handed, or maybe they prefer to do things slightly different, their shoulder geometry is lower or higher than yours, right? Or maybe they have an injury, right? And so they favor a certain way of doing or moving, right? And so that perceptual position information that you get by observation, by doing it to them, having them do it to you, and watching them do it to another, right, is valuable information for us to learn to adapt to new opponents, right? One of the reasons why, at least in the Inayan system of Eskrima, you don't find this in a lot of martial arts, is my experience. I've been in schools where they only train with certain people. They have an alternate training partner, and especially when they're testing, they have one person that they're gonna do all their choreography with, right? Inayan's not this way. We're constantly switching partners. You don't know who you're gonna test with. You don't know when you're gonna test. You don't know necessarily what you're gonna be tested on, right? Because it's a test. A test is a surprise, at least in the Inayan perception anyways, right? So you need multiple partners. You need different body types, handedness, preferences, all of those things. And the only way we get those things is having someone show up to class. So sometimes the challenge in training is to show up, and sometimes the challenge is making sure that the right people, or all the people I should say, show up to class so that I get the fullest experience from the training, right? There's also the lecture portion, or the question and answer portion of classes, that at least that I do, right? And I do that because when I was a student, I would put myself in the shoes of the person asking a question to my father as if it was my question, right? One, to learn where they're coming from, and two, because what I wanted to do was I wanted to leverage the lesson time of everybody in the class. If my father or another instructor designated by father is teaching in the class, and they're giving a lesson to someone, and it's not for the group entirely, but they're addressing a particular question, if I'm in earshot, or if we stop class to answer that question, I'm going to pretend that it's me who asked that question, right? I wouldn't have come up with that question. The other person did. And that's why it's important that they came to class, because they're going to ask a question that I wouldn't have asked. But I'm going to take it personal, right, in the sense so that I can leverage that training experience. That way I get more training, more personal training, as I subjectively personalize all the lessons as if they're all directed towards myself. And that helps me gain perspective and reduce my need for multiple training partners. But never did it really take the value away from multiple training partners, nor did it make me less for not having it, right? So showing up is such a huge part of training in martial arts. And then it's funny, like during COVID, I had met this person, a really brilliant artist, and she and I were talking about, she's a painter, right? And we were just talking about our respective arts and things like that. And she's like, you know, I heard about you from a mutual friend, and so I looked you up, and it's just weird. It's just like you never show up, right? You're not out there. And I guess that might be true from one perspective, right? I don't, or at least I didn't really publicize my training as much, or publicize the seminars that I would do. But those that are around knew that I was still training and doing things. I found it more important for me to be in the studio, get my hands dirty with my fingers in the ink and the paint, getting work done, than it was important for me to get on the soapbox and yell through the bullhorn, if you will. But I wasn't showing up as a teacher. It's an accurate assessment from the outside, from someone who doesn't do martial arts, right? An accurate assessment. Part of teaching is showing up as the teacher, being the person that's present and showing and hearing, and as a good teacher, adjusting. Right? Adjusting to the needs of the students, but also adjusting one's ability or one's method or approach of teaching to the people that are learning, right? I remember when my father passed away, this guy who used to be, an important part in my dad's organization for Europe, and in many ways was a European representative. Eventually he got kicked out because he was an underhanded human being, but that's not the subject, right? The subject is, he told me that I wasn't good enough to teach in Europe, right? Which is to say that because my dad was gone, I wasn't going to show up in Europe if I were to listen to this guy. But I didn't listen to him, and I went to teach in Europe. And the first seminar I did, I taught 4-count Sinawali. But I taught 4-count Sinawali for about 2.5 hours, maybe 3. I can't remember how long the seminar was. And I could see the look on some of the more what appeared to be advanced people's faces when I said, we're going to do this for the next whole session. And they're like, oh, I know this single Sinawali thing, upside and downside and all these things. and then I began to show them what I knew of just this one small piece of the art, how defenses were hidden in there, how attacks and sequences were hidden there, how disarms were hidden there, without me changing any of the movement whatsoever, just opening and closing the circles, making them wider. My good friend Nick Marino would talk about spirals, right? There's certain spirals within the single Sinawali that we can teach that facilitate takedowns, strikes, joint locks and arm breaks, and just regular 4-count Sinawali, just doing the pattern. And it's kind of the point of what the master class is about, at least this month, right? Is this idea that there's this depth here, and most people are like, well, I learned the thing so I can move on to the next thing. Yeah, like an infant learned it, right? Because if you'd actually paid attention, you'd probably learn a little bit more if you'd humble yourself, right? Like you're just looking for the next thing because you want to be a black belt, or you want to have a special title or some stupid thing like that. Like, coming from the point of view of being an existentialist and being a philosophy student, that's what I was in high school, college, as a philosophy and psychology major. Like that label is, your seeking of labels is so limiting. But in any event, right? You got to get past the cover of the book and the table of contents. You got to get past the inside leaf, if you will, the cover leaf, where they gives a description of the book and description of the author. That's where most people stop with their martial arts, right? You got to get in deeper, because there's so much there. You only get there if you show up, and you only get there if you show up and you pay attention and you look deeper. You come with the premise that people were learning this and teaching this because it saved their lives. So maybe Occam's razor, it's as simple as a high-low strike if we're talking about single Sinawali or 4-count. But maybe it's more. If they're pinning their life on it, not an accolade, a belt, or a title, or something made up like that, but something real. Now, don't get me wrong, titles for the purpose of denoting responsibility and also acknowledging dedication is important, and ranking is important because it's a milestone, it's a way or a system for you to know your progress, right? But don't think that it's what it is, that what most people treat as just an accolade, right? So it is important, but if you come from the perspective that these people were doing this for the purpose of saving their lives or saving the lives of others, right? Not a competition, not getting a ribbon or a medal or a trophy, but saving their lives, then you should realize, or you might realize, that there's something more there. Which brings me to the master class. So this ends the public portion of the podcast. I'll put the rest of this from beginning to end on the members only. If you're interested, look down in the description. There's a thing for the Steel membership. It's only $7 a month. You probably spend more on coffee in a week. But anyways, the masterclass, guys.